The story of the Oberheim OB-8. The early 80s can be described as the muscle car era of analog synths. Like most everything at the time, bigger meant better. Digital technology had combined with analog circuits to create a design frenzy that yielded some of the history's most epic and monstrous analog synthesizers. Based in Los Angeles, California, Tom Oberheim and his designers didn't hold back when building synthesizers that packed a massive sonic punch and were loaded with features going back to 1976 with their development of the absolutely massive 8-voice EVS. Weighing in at over 85 pounds and featuring 8 discrete SEM modules all linked together with a control section and a programmer with memory, the 8-voice was an analog behemoth that was one of the world's first portable 8-voice polyphonic synthesizers. Costing over $7,000 US with all these options, Oberheim built and delivered these to famous musicians such as Herbie Hancock, Joe Zawinul, Geddy Lee, and Vangelis. By the late 70s, synthesizer designs were starting to consolidate significantly, where synthesizer voices were being combined onto a single PCB, and parameter control and memory were driven by microprocessors such as the Zilog Z80 found in new emerging home computers like the Tandy TRS-80. Sequential Circuit's release of the Prophet 5 proved that a synthesizer loaded with features could be scaled into a very portable instrument without sacrificing sound quality and providing instantly recallable sound patches from memory. Oberheim's design team worked to scale the concept of the 8-voice down to a design that would fit within a smaller enclosure, retain Oberheim's sound, and was able to compete with the Prophet 5 in the market. By 1979, they released their new Oberheim OB-X that achieved this, and with a variable voice architecture of 4, 6, or 8 voices, it could be sold with a reduced voice count at a much lower and very competitive cost. The OB-X also utilized the new synthesizer chipset designed by Doug Curtis to help reduce the design such that a single OB-X voice port was only approximately 4 by 10 inches, something much smaller than the previous SEM design. The OB-X quickly became a true competitor of the Prophet 5, and its super fat sound and reliability was made popular with such musicians as Queen and Russia's Geddy Lee, who popularized the rich resonant filter sound in the 1980 release of Moving Pictures and the hit song Tom Sawyer. 1981's release of the Oberheim OB-XA moved the synthesizer design further from the original SEM architecture fully into a design based around the Curtis Music ICs. A single OB-X voice card now contained a full series of Curtis Music ICs, differing from the OB-X, which still used discrete components for the oscillators and filters. Using Curtis ICs for all voice functions took advantage of a more streamlined approach to synth voice design, and further improved reliability. During this time, Dave Smith at Sequential Circuits moved his Prophet 5 Rev 3 design over to the very same Curtis Music chipset from the previous SSM design. The OB-XA had many new features, such as a new 4-pull filter option, updated 2-pull filter design, dual sound mode for keyboard splits, and with a new look blue pinstripe front panel, the OB-XA was a popular choice for the professional synthesist. With Roland's 1981 release of the Jupiter 8, the era of the monster synth had reached an apex, with all the major synthesizer manufacturers offering a behemoth microcontroller-based polyphonic synthesizer with patch memory. In 1981, any of these synthesizers would set you back over $5,000 US, which is about $18,000 in today's dollars. In 1982, Eddie Van Halen can be heard on a phone call interview playing live his early version of Jump, which along with this intro would blow minds in the late 1983 release of Van Halen's 1984 album, showcasing once again the rich voicing and filters of the OB-XA. With software becoming more important to the design of a synthesizer, giving the capability to expand its features, the Oberheim engineers set afoot to build the ultimate 8-voice polysynth, the OB-8. Released in 1983, the design philosophy behind the OB-8 was to take all of the features of the OBXA, add as many new features as were economically feasible, and redesign all of the circuitry for increased reliability and lower cost. The resulting synthesizer had 90 fewer calibrations and 11 less circuit boards, and most of the remaining calibrations were microprocessor assisted or replaced by software functions. The result of this design and new software control gave an instrument that was much more stable with tuning as a whole and across the voices, giving a much tighter and accurate sound. This definitely can be heard in the OB-8, as it sounds extremely pure and tight relative to the OBXA. The OB-8 also had all the LFOs generated entirely in software, eliminating a significant amount of hardware and also again increasing reliability. The OB-8 filter had changed somewhat from the OBXA. The OBXA used a switch to change between two separate Curtis 3320 filter ICs per voice when moving from 2-pole to 4-pole configuration. On the OB-8, only one Curtis 3320 was used per voice, and the pole configuration was switched electronically. These engineering changes to the voice architecture and many other improvements, such as software-controlled op-amp offsets, significantly improved the sonic tightness of the OB-8. The OB-8 also featured the ability to adjust the panning of the voices by some tweaker knobs on the side wooden panels. By doing this and then stacking the voices, you could obtain an ultra-fat stereo sound, which at the time no other synth could touch. To keep the front panel relatively simple but offer more patch editing functionality, Oberheim engineers created a page 2 list of features. By pressing the chord page 2 button twice, it switched the panel into page 2 adjustment settings. Page 2 gave features such as LFO quantizing and inversion, LFO envelope mod, voice detunes, and disables. The OB-8 also introduced the concept of modulation sources and destinations, where modulation sources, such as rate and waveforms, could be assigned to destinations, such as pulse width, oscillator, filter frequency, and volume. This configuration would foreshadow the design of the Oberheim expander, which would have been an engineering design during the release of the OB-8. Between early 1983 and 1985, the OB-8 sold about 3,000 units, which was pretty decent considering the price tag of over $4,000 US. Having no display for parameter values and no VCOs instead of DCOs, as feature-laden as the OB-8 was, it was somewhat technologically behind the times from the very day it was released. Early models didn't ship with the brand new MIDI interface, but instead had the Oberheim computer interface, which let it connect to the DSX sequencer and DMX drum machine to complete the Oberheim Studio. After shipping the first few hundred OB-8s without MIDI, by 1984 Oberheim buckled and added the MIDI interface to the side wooden panels. And by mid-production, Oberheim had moved the MIDI interface to the back panel. During this time, Yamaha's game-changing digital technology in the DX7 also hit the market and significantly impacted the direction consumers and manufacturers would go over the next decade. Nonetheless, users such as the Pet Shop Boys, Van Halen, Depeche Mode, Prince, and Simple Minds all made use of the OB-8 during live shows and in the studio. The OB-8 was a grand synth at the peak of the 80s pop rock era. But Oberheim would not sit idle, and surprisingly, within a year after its launch, Oberheim released the Expander, and shortly afterwards its Matrix series, featuring a much sleeker and modern look with menu-driven parameter adjustments. Knobs were old news, and everybody wanted digital, a trend that would stay for decades. Even though I went on to own a D50 and other digital samplers by the late 80s, I always wanted an OB-8. One of my favorite live bands used the OB-8 during their set, which included many Rush covers. And even though the digital age took over in the late 80s, the OB-8 always seemed to me as the one synth that was still the king of the huge sound. In essence, the OB-8 was the pinnacle and last of Oberheim's classic designs, which kicked off an era where software started to become significantly more important within the design. A massive monster in both size and sound, the OB-8 will go down in history as one of the greatest analog synthesizers ever created.